Well, I elected to keep my screen off. I'll turn it on for a second just to make sure everyone realizes I'm not a robot, because we're going to be talking about robots today. Um, I put my fake diplomas up on the back. So actually, they might be my wife's, but anyway, um, I'll turn off the web sharing in a minute. So thanks everyone for being here today. Well, I just want to reiterate one more thing, and that is we're going to do a Q&A session at the end, but if you have a question as I'm going forward, just go ahead and type it into the box, and Rachel will, if I don't see it, Rachel will prompt me, because we can definitely accommodate your questions as they come up, and that typically happens. I don't want people to forget and then don't bring it up at the end. So why don't we get moving, and I'll turn that off. All right, hang on a sec, and this will snap in. There we go. That's me. I'm a partner at Witham Digital. We're essentially part of the tech advisory team here at Witham, and I've been doing this sort of stuff for 20 plus years, so that's kind of scary, but that's, what can I do? As you might guess, I like technology. I like airplanes. I fly them occasionally. It's kind of expensive, so I don't do it a heck of a lot anymore. But the fun fact is I'm a reformed professor. Last teaching job I had was a long time ago at Virginia Tech. And a further fun fact, now I have a kid at Virginia. So there's a little bit of fun ribbing that goes along with having taught there. If you're Virginia Tech folks, you like to give each other crap. So anyway, so I get it from my daughter. But anyway, there's two partners at Witham Digital. I'm one of them, and I take care of the data and automation space, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, I want to talk about really process automation, and then we're going to dig a little bit into, I would say, a topic that's a lot of hype, but there's something there, and that's RPA. It's called robotic process automation, but how we can apply it to a physician's practice. A lot of times when we're talking about technology, people will take the CPEs and then we'll think, okay, well, how does this really apply to me? Honestly, process automation and RPA can directly apply to operating your practice more efficiently, more effectively, more securely, all that great stuff. Honestly, it does. In fact, we'll talk about a case study I have underway right now with a telemammography firm. I may introduce that a little bit earlier than I have. I have it at the end now. Maybe I'll sprinkle that in so I can hold your interest. Okay, so why are we looking at this stuff? So process automation and robotic process automation. So what we have found through our research, and it's certainly been validated through research provided by lots of third-party vendors, that manual processes are still ubiquitous in small and medium-sized practices. And not only physician practices, all types of healthcare operations, healthcare firms, and all types of firms. Now, robotic process automation is a type of process automation. And what it does is it bridges the gap between applications that don't natively talk to each other. So if you have patient data in one system and financial information and insurance information in another, they may or may not talk, right? They may not interoperate, we call it, even though there are standards out there that they're supposed to. But in real life, especially small and medium-sized practices, you probably have data in more than one location. And dealing with those separate siloed data repositories are what we're going to talk about in terms of RPA today. So RPA can actually automate movement of data between those systems. And I can give you some use cases, and I'll talk about one that I'm directly involved with. Actually, two. One's not a physician's practice, but it's a small, 100-person engineering firm. I can talk about their use case as well. I don't have a slide about it, but I'll probably sprinkle in experience there because that's an RPA engagement that we have underway right now. In general, what you'll find, though, is if you can automate some of these processes with an RPA tool, you should see higher accuracy, faster results, all that sort of good stuff, because a machine is doing it and not a person. All right, so let's disambiguate here a little bit. That's a big word I learned in college. It's hard for me to say, but it's a lot of confusion between process automation and RPA. So let's Let's disambiguate, shall we? So, first of all, manual processes are still everywhere. I know I just talked about it, but like where are they? And certainly in any physician practice, any practice really, you probably have a lot of manual processes. Invoicing, I would say that's the number one thing. Paper's still coming in. The paper may actually come in as an email. It comes as an attachment. And what do? You print it out. Then you take that printout over to someone else and they sign off on it and someone will enter it into your system. That's very, very common. I would say number one. Hiring is still pretty manual. Scheduling, recruiting, benefits, all that stuff. And there's paper everywhere. That is an interesting issue. And from my perspective, though, what's really important is information is still in silos. Pardon me. We started doing, the web, the internet. It's been over 20 years since we've been talking about, exchanging data, doing things automated, all that sort of stuff, and it's still a problem. So while RPA might be new, process automation is well established. I mean, we've all heard of this, and we've all probably are engaging in it every day. We get email alerts. We'll get you as physician, practice operators, you're probably sending out SMS alerts about appointments and that sort of stuff. So automation is all around us. We're engaging in it, but usually in a piecemeal fashion. Expense reviews are a big thing that's already been automated. But again, that automation usually takes place in a silo, and the data are not shared across machines. And certainly patient data may not necessarily be in one system, even though we all, everyone, if you're not in a physician's practice or if you don't have physicians in your family or what have you, exposed to the business of operating a physician's practice, everyone thinks that data are just stuck in one system. Your EMR, your medical health record system, whatever. But we all know that it's not. We know that it's distributed across multiple systems. And that's just patient information. We start talking about the operational data around the firm itself, what the firm is up to, your accounting system, your employee systems, all that stuff tends to be separated from one another, and it's a problem. So to bridge that gap in terms of system being siloed, RPA is kind of the new thing in process automation. But I'm going to acknowledge that RPA is overhyped right now. I get inquiries from people who want to talk about RPA, but what they're really talking about is just automating a workflow, where an approval, for instance, that sort of stuff. That's not necessarily RPA. I put a graphic in just about, here we're still here 20 years later, right? Data are distributed across whatever silo you have. Most people are still operating in silos. And they bridge the gap of silos with people entering data, reporting data, getting a report out of one system and typing it into another. It's very, very common. So let's look a little bit, though, at this whole idea of RPA, because honestly, it is hyped. I get it. But it is also something that's happening very rapidly. Billions of dollars are being poured into RPA. So it behooves you to understand what's going on and then start figuring out how to take advantage of it, because I actually think you can. And really, that's the purpose of today's session, is starting that education of what RPA is and what it might be able to do for you. We're going to have a follow-up webinar here in the near future where we're going to do demos of some of these systems, okay? We are building out some solutions ourselves, and there are some existing ones that some of our vendors have already built that we're going to demo in a follow-up to this webinar, which Rachel and I still have to schedule, but we're going to try to do that this year. All right, so I want to dive in a little bit more about RPA. Okay, so you'll hear people call it IPA. Now I'm hearing DPA. So why don't I use the term IPA? IPA is a beer. So I have friends who insist on calling it IPA. I have people on my staff that call it IPA, and I honestly think we're going drinking. So I prefer to stick to I'm a purist, and I stick to the term RPA. But now Microsoft, for instance, and some other vendors like Nintex, they're starting to throw out the term DPA, digital process automation. So nomenclature aside, It's all the same stuff, but RPA is really the next level of business process automation. It's a way of automating a process. And really at the heart of it, a machine, a robot, is going to mimic the actions of a human. Think of it as an intelligent macro. For those of you who remember, and may still do this, by the way, and I bet you there are a few people on the webinar today who write Excel macros, an RPA tool is just like an Excel macro, where remember when you had worked it all out and you could record your macro, you record your actions. That's what these things do. They record your actions, turn it into code, and then they do it, the next time. And it's really, so that's the closest analogy I have. And also what's interesting is when you record the macro, it's a low code development activity. What happens is that the machine, the software is going to write the supporting code, so you don't need to know how to code. It helps, but you don't need to. But it's more than just workflow. Automating what's happening in the process is very important. So, but the RPA part of the process automation is the recording of the actions and then a robot doing it in the future. So that's kind of the context for what RPA is. So what can it do? All right, let's cut right to the chase. What can an RPA robot do? So it can log into an application. Once it logs into the application, it can grab a file, data, and it can then push, copy that stuff to another database. It can copy it to another application. You can even scrape data from the web. That's a little trickier, by the way, and I suspect we'll get a question about that later. And the telemammography use case that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, that's actually what we're doing. We're screen scraping from a web app and putting it into another app. Or it might be the other way around. But either way, scraping data from the web is a little tricky. Now, remember how I said RPA bridges that gap between an API, as if there's no API between systems? If you grab data from one system manually through one of these robots, it could then open up the API and put the data there for you. So it can interact with an API if you want it to. So, but the cool thing is, this is something that's very important, is that it can extract content and data from like a document. It can read a document for you, okay? Grab the information from the document that you're after and then do something with it. It can open emails and attachments. I have a use case right now where what we're doing is there's a timesheet approval process at an engineering firm on the West Coast that we're working with. What they do is when everyone puts their timesheets in, there's inevitably people using the wrong code. A human knows what they're looking for in terms of those wrong codes. We're training the robot to identify those same errors, alert the human that those errors exist, and then start the remediation process for those errors. The reason they're doing this is to dramatically reduce the time it takes to make sure that all the timesheets are correct and then in. And the final thing, well, not final, there's lots of other things RPA can do. It can make calculations for you. So let's say you grab some data, like these timesheet data. It can actually add up to make sure the hours are correct if your system doesn't do that already. Or it can add up the hours per project, and maybe your system doesn't do that easily. The robot can go do that stuff for you. So there's lots of stuff it can do, and these are just a few examples. Okay, so why? Yeah.
Real quick, a question did come in about how the RPA solutions are HIPAA compliant.
Okay, so that's a good question. If you have a human sitting on a computer in your network and you're grabbing data, they're copying the data from one system to the other, the robot's doing the exact same thing. So if you deem that a human moving those data from system to system is HIPAA compliant, it's in your network, it's secure, the robot's doing nothing differently. Because it is a user on your network and the data are not being shared outside your network, And as long as you're not doing anything crazy with those data, it's the same thing as a human doing it. Now, you don't want, remember, you don't want to take the data that you're grabbing and then push it out to some other system. In fact, you don't want to email it around. It can't leave the country usually, right? That sort of stuff. And these tools operate on your network. So that's the critical component here. Most of them do anyway. They're starting to gravitate towards the cloud, but then you still operate them in a virtual private network. So great question. And there's no real difference between a robot doing it or a human, as long as all the other security components around your network and the data not being shared outside outside your organization, that sort of stuff. It's all HIPAA compliant. But a great question, because we're going to talk about how they work here in a minute. So, but why would we use this thing, or why would we rather, why would we get the robots involved rather than the human? So the primary reason is that there's not an API between the two systems you're trying to move data between. Okay, that's reason number one. Second one is, if there are APIs, you usually have to write some code. And guess what? Small and medium-sized practices typically do not have developers. APIs are usually, pardon me, they usually cost money. So the API itself usually costs some money, and then the development time. Now, you may have developers on staff, or you may have consultants. So, again, this goes into an ROI calculation. Now, if you don't have programmers or developers and the API is not available, the robot may make sense. I do say may. It may not, and we'll talk about that in a second. Because honestly, I'm in the business of deploying these tools, but I don't want to deploy it for someone that's not going to work. All right, Rachel, we have a polling question. This is very exciting.
Yeah, yep. So our first polling question is, what percentage of critical processes are manual or paper-based? Most, about 50-50, few, or not applicable?
So we're asking, how really we're trying to figure out how many people have manual or paper-based process out there, both, right? Just you're doing stuff old school. That's the way I wanted to word the question, but Rachel wouldn't let me.
All right, about 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to close it out.
Okay. So what's it look like? And once you close it out, what the results look like?
So it looks like there is, most people have 54%, they said, 46% said 50-50, and no one had few.
Okay. So what happens, so most people, as we suspect, you have a lot of manual processes. That's good. But now it sounds to me in the results that there might be some folks that have automated a couple of things. So, maybe at some point we start talking about that at the end if someone wants to type it in. But so we have some automation taking place. That's typically the case. But let's refine our question a little bit more, if you don't mind. Come on, wake up. There it is. So we have one more question here, and here's the difference. So what I'm asking here is, are you pushing data between systems manually? Is a person moving data? And what are the choices there, Rachel?
This is, yes, we still rely on manual data processing. Some data are automatically moved between systems. Nope, all fixed or not applicable. So it looks like right now we were at 50-50. Now it's changing a little bit. All right, about 10 more seconds. Okay,
usually somebody's snarky enough to click on all fixed. That's what I would do.
All right, and it looks like
the results like a split. 50. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So that's good. You're in the right seminar then. But what I sometimes do is when we run these things for other types of industries is people that have it kind of fixed or addressed, we try to lure them into discussing what they're doing. So it is interesting that some people are automating. And you know, that's very common. So that means you're starting to figure this stuff out. And what kind of is confusing, at least in my interactions with our clients and our prospective clients, is people are trying to figure this stuff out. But now then a new technology comes along like RPA, and you're like, oh my gosh, now what do I do? Well, that's what we're trying to help you figure out today. So why would you do RPA? Well, it really can reduce your administrative costs. It can mitigate risk, and usually risk because your errors are going to be, and it's, you know, right next to that is improved data accuracy. It mitigates your risk because the data are correct. The error rate, I did not put the error rate information I have in here because it varies and I don't have it by niche. But when you have people entering data from one system to another, especially reading from a screen or copying from one thing to the other, there's an error rate by operation that you can calculate. It's fairly high. Now, here's the deal. If you tell the robot to do something erroneous, so if you introduce that error, that improper procedure into a automated process, you're just going to make that error faster, quicker, cheaper. So that's another thing you want to be careful about. But if you have things set up correctly, it's going to do it faster. It's going to do it with much more accuracy. It should reduce some paperwork. It should increase your throughput, right? It should make your productivity go through the roof if you have a lot of transactions that need to be automated. Hang on one sec. Right then. All right. So now part of the process, so how do you kind of pull this stuff off? We really recommend that you map your process out. Now, in the old days, what we used to do is use, you know, Visio. Visio is still not a bad way to do it. It's just kind of time consuming. You know, you build out those flow charts essentially about who does what and when they do it. There are tools now that do this, and they're very, very easy to use and they're super intuitive to use as well. Now, this is a shameless plug. The one that we use is from a firm called Nintex. It's called ProMap. You can map out your processes, but there are other ones out there that work great. The reason Nintex works so great is, let's say you have Nintex as your process automation tool. When you map the process out in ProMap, it can be imported into their RPA tool. Now, it still needs tweaking, but it just makes the whole process a little bit quicker. So, but the robot tool itself, like Nintex, like K2, which was just bought by Nintex, like the Microsoft Suite, like some more that we'll talk about, you tell it what to do, okay? So the human robot interface is really important. So the agent, the robot, will watch what the human does, and you record that, and then the tool will do it from you know, going forward. Now, there are some other things we've got to worry about here, because you do want humans to be able to check in on the process for sure. You don't want to just let this thing rip. So the script will be loaded into the tool and executed going forward. Some tools handle exceptions, so that's the AI piece of it. So that's where they're getting smarter. Right now, especially for small and medium-sized practices, when the tool encounters an exception, you can have a human be alerted. Now, in future, and even now, you can actually have the AI decide what to do with the exception if you can. But that's probably a little too sophisticated, actually. All right then. Okay, so again, it's as simple as recording these macros in Excel that we used to do a few years ago. We're going to record what the human did. We're going to test, and validate. This is an iterative process. Then you execute the playback, you start seeing the results. So I use that analogy or the example, sorry, earlier about the timesheets. We're in the process now of testing it and validating the output. So the robots are running. We're running them to see how good they're doing. and we're just about done. So it's, but again, it's an iterative process. Okay, so key concept, attended and unattended. Attended means humans are essentially involved. There might be only a few people involved. You may want to create one really quickly, and a human is going to pretty much kick it off every time. Maybe watch what it does, and then it's done. You want more sophisticated robots are unattended. They are going to go fast. They're going to do what they do, and they're going to let it rip. And but that doesn't mean humans are not involved in the entire process. You could still build approvals into the robot's activities. So while we say attended and unattended, it's just really the degree and the scale that is going to determine if it's an attended or unattended or attended. The pricing differs though. That's that most vendors will price them differently. All right, things to keep in mind. This gets back to that great question we had earlier. RPA tools operate typically on premises. So you'll set up a machine, usually has to be a pretty beefy machine somewhere in your network. And we recommend that it be a dedicated machine. And that's going to run the macro. It's going to record the activity, it's going to process, do all the workflow. And depending on what you're asking it to do, it can do a lot of it needs a fair amount of CPU and memory. They can share data. Look, you can share data in a secure cloud if you want. It doesn't have to stay in your network. But again, for security and to be HIPAA compliant, it's great to contain everything and encrypt everything on the back end. And so if you're running on a machine within your network and on premises, that's just the easiest, most secure thing to do. And it's just the way they're architected right now. That will change. There's no doubt. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat. It's hard to talk for this long, for me anyway. Let's forge ahead. So let's look at some of these tools. I mentioned Nintex. It's a great tool. Now, UiPath has been a leader in this. Automation Anywhere is ubiquitous. Blue Prism, again, ubiquitous in the RPA process automation space. There's more vendors on here I don't have. I have worked with these in the past. Now, Power Automate, this is the Microsoft solution. This gets a little complicated, but we'll talk about it again. But Microsoft is getting big into RPA. Now, Microsoft doesn't lead. This is what's interesting. So we do a lot of Microsoft work. Power Automate is the automation tool, and now Microsoft just bought an RPA vendor called Softomotive. Yeah, not Softmotive, Softomotive. It's a European firm. I forget from which country. They build a tool called Win Automate. That's their RPA solution. They are now integrating it into the Power Automate tool. So while Microsoft has not been considered a leader, once they decide to do something, they go in big, and they're going in big into RPA and process automation. Now, Nintex is a close partner with Microsoft, UiPath, Blue Prism. I know for a fact I work with these guys. Everybody works with Microsoft. Now, Microsoft essentially is getting into it organically. And but there's pros and cons to that. But these are just some of the vendors. And if you get online and you just type in RPA vendors, you're going to get bombarded with stuff. But we work with these, and they're awesome, by the way. So let's forge ahead. Gosh, I'm getting latency. Oh, we have a poll question. This is a trick question, really, and anybody has developers on staff or available. So this kind of leads us down the path of what's the best thing to do. Rachel, what are the choices?
Yep, the choices are yes, on staff, yes, we have contractors, or no, are you kidding?
Yeah. Especially when if you're small, medium-sized practice. So let's leave it open for a min.
Seems right now most people are voting no, are you kidding? Second is yes on staff. And third is we have contractors. So we'll give everyone about 5 more seconds to get your vote in. Okay,
good. Excellent.
Here are the results.
Some people have them on staff. That's good. That will, so all your choices will influence what you do here. This is good info. And because we have people saying, no, are you kidding? That means an RPA might be, it's an option for you, honestly, because you don't have people who can code. So let's get this thing to move again. All right, it did. How would you pick an RPA tool that works for you? First thing I would do, and what I recommend to our clients in our assessments, is what's your current IT platform? Are you a Microsoft shop? And by Microsoft shop, I don't mean Microsoft Office necessarily, because we all run that. But are you using Microsoft databases? Are you using the Microsoft Power Apps platform? So these are some of the questions. Most businesses are on Office 365, for instance. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. That just means what that does is it just influences your progression around tool evaluation. Okay, some people may not want to stay in the Microsoft environment. Now these are almost all exclusively Microsoft. They run on Microsoft's server infrastructure, but that doesn't mean you have to use the Microsoft tool. Nintex is independent. K2 was independent up until now. So anyway, Microsoft's not your only solution here, even though it's not a bad one. So look at your current IT platform. How does it fit with your, what's your future? Are you going to stick with are you going to be using Microsoft Teams? That's a great example right there. I should have put that in there. So if you collaborate with Teams, that influences your decision as well. So anyway, you just want to pick a tool that's going to fit within your existing IT strategy and your overall approach. I should say, if you have one. But be honest, how technical are you and your staff? We have some feedback that people are like, are you kidding me? We don't have developers or anything like that. But there's some good news in all of this. Most of the RPA tools, because they're modern, they're literally being developed in the last year or two. They use something called low code. When you get on a low code tool, you actually tell. Now, when you record a macro, it's literally writing the code in the back end. But you can then go in and pick actions you want to happen. So for instance, if the robot is doing a series of steps, it gets done with a few steps, then you want another action to take place, like an approval. Well, you can actually then pick approval from a menu, and then the code for the approval will be introduced to the tool itself. You don't have to go code it yourself. So you literally can pick from a menu of options and then the code will be written on the back end. Actually, the code is written into that little thing you pick, but this is the way most RPA tools are being architected right now, using a low code. You will hear the term no code, but that's complete BS. There is no code solution out there. I mean, that's even borderline ridiculous. I hate when people say, yeah, it's a no code. Now, there's some code in there. And you may actually have to have somebody look at and understand something about how it's connecting to another application or something like that. There's going to be some sort of technical capability involved, even in the low code tools. All right, let's see if I can get this to advance. Yay. An example, I forget what tool is on the left. I think that might be Softomotive, but the idea here is there are menu options on the left. You can watch the code being built, but the idea is now the machines are smarter than ever, and they are going to write the code based on what they watch you do. That's pretty both scary. By the way, Skynet will take over. I'm convinced of that from the Terminator series. So I just wanted to get that out there. All right, here's the Win Automation development environment. Remember I mentioned that Microsoft has an RPA tool? this is what it looks like. Now you can it'll record what you're doing and it'll tell you what it's doing, but then you can augment and pick things from a menu to have it do. So, but the tool is built for people who are not developers. So that's what's really cool here. So what they do is they figure out, here's the most action, here's the most activities you're going to want this thing to do. And you pick from a selection of menu items and it will build it for you, build the code, and you just tell it. So you tell it what you want to do and the code is going to be introduced into the canvas. Now, if you are a developer and you understand it, you can actually build your own commands. But since most of us don't do that, including me, I don't do that anymore, you're going to want the tool to do it. And by the way, most of the activities you're doing are pretty routine, if you will, and there's a pre-existing code snippets to engage in that activity. So that's the good news here. So, all right, so here's how we go and evaluate the tools, if it's going to fit for you. You look at your IT platform, your backbone, you look at your own development capabilities. In the case of the folks that are participating today, you don't have a lot of development capabilities, so you're going to need a solid low-code approach. So, but then, you know, this is nuts and bolts stuff. Who needs to use this? Is this your admin staff? Is it your CFO staff? What's the use case that you're trying to support? Are you trying to automate invoicing? That could be it. Or are you trying to move patient data between one system and another? But you want to determine your ROI. You're probably waiting for me to say that, but that is a key part of this process. But it's pretty simple for a manual process. You can get really clever on your ROI, and as soon as I start talking about, you know, a simple way to calculate it, people are going to start going, okay, well, you should do X, Y, or Z. However you calculate ROI, yes, do it. But honestly, start with the cost of the person doing it and how much time they're spending doing the process. But here's something you're probably not factoring in is rework. Factor rework into your ROI calculations. I suspect there's a fair amount of rework in whatever type of manual process you guys are considering. That has to be an input. Now, the other thing we have to think about is what do those people do? So remember, somebody's got to train that robot. So someone who knows that process inside and out needs to train the robot. So they usually need to be, you have to calculate what they're going to do in terms of the automated process. The idea here, though, is that they're going to be able to go do other things. Either do more, right? If they're, let's say you have one person responsible for manual data entry. If a robot does it, a lot more, you can get a lot more productivity. That person may then just be validating what the robot does because it can do so much more work, or they can be redeployed to do other things. So these all factor into your ROI calculus. So how much do they cost? I'll apologize up front. It really does depend. But people always ask me, Dale, what's the software cost out of the gate? Well, what we're seeing with the vendors that we work with, around 10 to 15K per year is the software subscription for a limited number of processes that you can support. These are called starter packs usually, and they typically limit the number of users or the number of bots that are running at any given time. So they throttle back what you can do because they want you to buy more. Of course, that's what they do. But you just got to pick the right one. But most offer some sort of starter pack in the range I have on there. That's just for the subscription. Your implementation costs are separate. So you need to calculate your initial costs and then an ongoing support to calculate your true ROI. Now, here's another thing we see a lot. You need to calculate ROI for the life cycle of the tool you're using. So if it's costing me, if I have a person and I'm just throwing these, if I have a $100,000 or $75,000 person out there who's working with a tool that costs me $20,000 a year to operate, but because that's how much my subscription cost for that tool is. But if you retire that tool or you're going to move to a different tool, you need to factor that into your ROI. So you don't want to go and automate a process for a tool that's going to be replaced or significantly upgraded in like a few months' time, because that's going to change the robot, how the robot works. So an upgrade to the core system will change the way the robot works. You may need to go back and retrain it. So again, you have to start factoring these things in as you're starting to figure out if you can afford it. All right, so good. We're time checked. Okay, we're about right. All right, let's do one more poll question. This is going to be again a leading question. And do you have Office 365? Let's open the poll. Is this simple? Yes, no? I hope, Rachel.
Yep, this is yes, no. I have no idea.
All right, I forgot about that one.
So looks like most people voted yes, some voted no, and a few did. I have no idea. We will keep this open for about 10 more seconds. Just a reminder to make sure in order to get credit, you have to vote for the polls.
All right, let's make sure everyone votes.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. And here are the results. Pretty evenly split. There are a few that I have no idea, but 46% voted for both yes and no.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, it's, no is actually a little surprising, the number, but so it is that influences your decision tree. So let's talk about that for a minute. Let me get this to respond. It always takes. All right, so why does it matter? I talked earlier about Microsoft has their own suite of process automation and RPA tools. Remember, not all automation is RPA, but whatever. They have automation and RPA tools. If you are running Office 365, you need to see if those tools are going to work for you. Why? Because you may go spend for a tool that you could get from Microsoft that would be a lot easier to integrate. If you're running Office 365, you're using Teams, for instance. Remember, it's going to, just like Teams does, the automation tools are going to use the identity management and security tools that are contained within the Office 365 family of tools. So it might be a lot easier to secure, to maintain, and all the group security, all that sort of stuff is going to be easier in Microsoft, because it's going to just natively work with how you're controlling identities now and controlling access to applications now. So it's going to be easy to share content between the applications. What's the downside out of the gate? I think they're a little pricey. Right now, to use the full suite, all the capabilities of the tool sets that they are putting out there, it's $40 per user per month. Now, if you only have a small subset of users, it might work. There are ways to deal with this. It depends on where the data are located. Where's the tool grabbing the data? If all the data are in your Office 365 tenant, that $40 would not apply. So that's the good news. So that's why you do an assessment to figure all this stuff out. But the tools are out there and they're good. And where we're seeing a lot of interest is a lot of people are using Teams now. Since COVID came out, and and we're all dealing with the pandemic, and we're working from home and all that sort of stuff, Teams is becoming where we work. And even if you're using Zoom, Teams is where you're collaborating on stuff, you're sharing documents with each other, but you can also you can integrate these robots with your team, okay? You can execute, if you have a project, or if you have a collaborative team that's maybe doing your invoicing, they can execute the robot or watch what the robot's doing from Teams and see the output from the robot in Teams. That's a big deal. You don't have to do it that way. It's just a time saver. It just makes it easier on your users. But again, you have to look to see if it's going to be too pricey. But so if you're one of the folks that have Office 365, you got to look at the tool sets. I think I have a slide on what the tools are. Yeah, there they are. I put on there before, so Power Automate is one of those tools. But the other ones in the Power Apps family is they have these things called Power Apps where you build applications in Microsoft Office 365. You have Power BI, which is a analytics tool. You have data connectors. You have AI you can introduce. Lots of stuff you can do. Okay, and I don't even have the integration with Teams on there. So if you're running Office 365, consider it. If you're not running Office 365, you can go buy standalone Nintex. You can buy K2, which will be Nintex soon. There's other choices out there, by the way. So while I love the Microsoft Power Platform, I work with Nintex a lot, work with UiPath. Power Platform is pretty good, and you'd have to rule it out if you're a Office 365 user. If you're not, consider it, but the other tools might be a better choice. Right then, all right, let's talk about this because we are running out of time, Rachel, so we have a few questions probably by now. I want to talk about a telemammography use case I'm involved with right now. So the telemammography business, they conduct their studies using a proprietary application. So the reads, the images, the PACS images are in this tool, and they conduct the study with this tool. However, the patient information is contained in another system. So people are going in and copying and pasting the patient data into the application where they're going to conduct the study. Okay, so they need to augment that patient record, the study, with data contained in another system. Actually, it's plural, it's systems. So what do? They hire people to copy and paste the patient data from one system into the other. And they do this once or twice a week. So what happens is that there's a backlog, right? So there's lots of this backlog of all the reads. This is about a 10 doctor telemammography practice. It's based down in Atlanta. And they approached us to say, okay, what can we do about this? Because they're getting errors. And also, so how they do it, the people they hire are not full-time people. So they have a schedule. They come in at the end of the week to deal with this backlog. And sometimes the backlog gets a little hefty. And it's forcing one of the doctors to then go in and do it. So that doesn't make sense, right? Because if that backlog builds up, they're paying a lot for those physicians. So they don't want the physicians to be doing this activity, but sometimes they have to because the people are on a certain schedule and the backlog. In fact, what happens, they had to hire more people because during COVID, remember, you couldn't go get your get a mammography, right? You couldn't get a mammogram because all the facilities were closed. Then once the facilities reopened, there's a huge backlog. So now people are trying to augment all these studies that are being conducted. They are working their tails off. Everybody is, but they're screwing up, and that's why they approached us. Also, it's just a tedious process. So we are looking at RPA. We are looking at, we've done the first level of watching the humans ourselves to see if the RPA tool can do it. And we're probably going to conduct a proof of concept here in the next couple of weeks. So do I have a question on, I don't know if I had I think we might have a question on why wouldn't it work? That's the question we usually get right about now. So, but anyway, RPA is being looked at is to grab the data from one system and push it off into the third-party application that the study is being conducted within. So, and I already used the timesheet case, and we have another RPA case out there that we're looking at, which is to reconcile transactions between systems. So that may actually work for physicians as well. All right. What are the key takeaways at this point of me pontificating for 52 minutes now? I really honestly think that small practices even can take advantage of this. I see it with our clients, and I see it with even family members who are physicians. They're encountering these problems all the time. especially because not all the data you need two things. Either even to conduct your patient care, right? To provide patient care, data are typically not all just in your EMR, right? You got to augment the data, like the telemammography case. But think of your financial operations, ordering stuff, the benefits, all that sort of stuff. Those data are probably in separate systems, and you may need to move data between those systems. RPA is a viable way to do that, even for smaller practices. So with that, Rachel, do we have any questions that you know of? I've not been monitoring it.
Yep. Yeah. So if you came in, and I didn't want to interrupt,
Wait, we do?
just someone had asked, what is RPA not good at?
Yeah, that's the first one we always get. Thank you, whoever did that. And first of all, thanks for having questions, because that's good. It's kind of awkward because we will sit here for 8 minutes with silence if people don't ask questions. So wait, so the first one is, what's RPA not good at? Do I have that right?
Yep.
Okay, what is it not good at? We encounter issues if you're scraping data from one website and trying to put it into another application. Why would we have a problem? Because sometimes on the screen, that the result, let's say the human types a request into a website and gets a result back. If that moves around on the screen, that can cause the RPA, the robot, a little bit of problems. So you have to tweak it on where it's looking. You can tell it where to look, and sometimes you have to tweak that. But there's another scenario where it doesn't make sense, but it's not on the technology side per se. That one is when you have extremely cheap labor to do your manual process. Now, I talked to a physicians group recently that had a very similar case to that telemammography, but what they do is to augment data in one system to the other, they hire college interns, and these people are getting paid dirt. So it costs far less to hire the college interns, and then, by the way, they're all in pre-med for this particular business I talked to. They're all pre-med students doing whatever they're doing at some ridiculously cheap rate. But even to reworks, I said, factor in your rework. So they went and did that, and it's still cheaper just to keep having the kids do it. So in that case, don't do RPA. All right, what's the next one?
Next one is, in terms of ROI, when is RPA not cost effective?
Okay, I think I jumped the gun on that one. Yeah, it's not cost effective when you have ridiculously cheap labor and the rework is still cheaper than the tool. So I would say use your price point of one of those starter packs of 10 to 15K. Remember, that's per year. So then times your, or compare that with the cost of your labor and the cost of the rework. If that's more than, the RPA tool is more than that, it's probably not going to make sense. All right. How many more do we got?
And if anyone else has any more questions, please feel free to write them in now or reach out to Dale afterwards. You'll have his email address. Third question, how secure is all this automation stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think we had that question earlier. Look, again, how you need to compare it is, and here's what's really funny. I'll tie it into that question we just had. Or I guess the firm I just talked about, they're hiring college interns, and they figure that's secure, right? So these kids come in, pre-med students come into their office and move data around on their network. Robots doing the same darn thing. So what you need to do is just make sure all the systems that you're touching are secure, and do not be sending the data in a insecure fashion, and you'll have no problems. Remember, HIPAA is one of those things that a lot of it is you just have to have a process of notification if there's been a violation. So, and obviously there's other things you need to worry about, but generally the robot is just like a person. In fact, the robot will have credentials that you can identify. So you can, from a logging perspective, you'll see when the robot logs into a system, So you'll always know what the robot has done and when it does it. So there really is no difference between the robot and a human.
And the last question we got, this person's a little unclear. Do I need automation or RPA?
Oh, okay. That's, I'm sure, my fault. So stay on the lookout for that, please. And Rachel, what else we got to do to close this thing out?
I think that should do it. Thank you, everyone. And just a reminder to please fill out the survey when you leave this webinar, and be on the lookout for our upcoming invites. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye now.